It's fantastic to have these kinds of discussions. All over the world, we live in such a connected, globalized place now. Everything affects us at a certain degree now, and it's important that we develop kind of, I think, these communities. This podcast, I think, is a great example of how investment and capital are the same no matter where you are. It just contextually changes the risk and reward ratios.
Welcome to another episode of the ESG Factor podcast. I'm Vincent McCarthy. There's a great quote from Carl Jung, and it says, "If you've nothing to create, then create yourself." We all write our own story, and we always have the power to add new chapters. Sometimes we just need to have the courage to do so. One of my chapters that stands out is my time in Guatemala, where I lived there in 2017 and worked in impact investment. That set the stage for everything I've done since in terms of setting up Cotera Impact, ESG Ireland, and the Responsible Investment Institute. So I'm excited today to have two friends from Guatemala on the podcast. I worked with Juan in impact investing, and I've also got to know his brother Juan, which to everyone is going to be very confusing. Why did your dad name you the same name?
It's really good to be here, Vincent. I don't know. I always question their creativity,
Yeah.
But I think they just really wanted to remember his name.
So your dad's name is Juan Carlos. So you're Juan Fernando.
I'm Juan Fernando, and my younger brother is Juan Carlos, and my older brother is Jose Carlos.
So you guys are in Guatemala City at the moment.
Yeah.
When people think of Guatemala, they probably have a certain perception of what Guatemala is like. And to give people a bit of context, I moved to Guatemala in 2017. I went to learn Spanish and learn about impact investing, and I ended up working there for 8 months. So it was a great experience. And we were in a place called Quetzaltenango, also known as Shela, and it's in the hills, the Mayan hills, because it's a very Mayan community there. And that's where I worked with Juan in impact investment. And Juan, what stands out in terms of your own experiences? Because it's different for you too, going to a place like Quetzaltenango, because it is quite different from Guatemala City.
For sure. So every part of Guatemala is very different. In the highlands, it's a different feeling, just the type of forest, the type of people. You're closer to Mexico. And I was actually just coming back from living in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. So for me, it was a completely different experience than living in the capital, more than 4 or 5 million people. And Quetzaltenango still has that small town feeling. You know what I mean?
I do. I know what you mean. I can remember it's bringing me back to where I was living. I was living up in these hills looking over the whole of Shela. It was amazing. It was great for about 7 months, but the final month I almost died of the cold. So I was delighted leaving when I finally left, but I have great memories of Quetzaltenango. And what's interesting for me is that was 2017, and everything I've done since has kind of come out of that experience. And I don't know if you remember when we were talking about impact investing, and for listeners, basically I put together this report on the impact investment sector, and we were talking about developing an impact investment process for the company that we worked with. And if you remember, there was still a lot of vagueness around the team. And I said to people, well, look, if you don't take control of the narrative, the big financial services firms, the big private equity firms are going to take this impact investing concept and apply it in a way that brings in lots of money for them, rather than what it was set up to do, is to help developing countries like Guatemala. What's your thoughts now, looking at it 3.5 years on, at impact investing and how it's evolved?
Yeah, so I definitely remember that meeting and that conversation. It was very intense, and you had a lot to say, as you always do, Vincent. And I think some things have changed, others haven't. I feel like the need for capital in Guatemala creates a different environment than in other places. So that company we worked for, they created a fund. They've dispersed quite a bit of money to different social enterprises. So things have changed, but just to put everyone into context of interest rates in Guatemala, how hard it is to have access to capital, it's just a different environment in that sense. So impact investing, I've seen different players coming into the scene that probably weren't there in 2017. If you're saying like the type of impact they've created or the type of success stories, it's hard to find. But things are coming along. These things take time. So yeah, I think that's a bit of where we are at the moment. And I think my brother has a lot more to say about this.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and quickly just sorry about the noise because I am in the city and so it's gonna be a bit loud, but no, but the things that have evolved in Guatemala have changed significantly over time. Impact investing has also become this blanket term for certain funds to basically what, as Vincent said, use venture capital, find interesting opportunities, and then greenwash with it quite effectively. So it's this kind of trade-off that you have around transparency and also bringing in capital. And some of the times these instruments aren't as concessional as you would consider in developed markets. An impact investing instrument here could still be 8 to 10%, 15%, and that's better than what you got on the traditional market. So it's also something that is very contextually based, and it just depends on access and where you are in the country. Infrastructure defines a lot of the risk and how it's defined in Guatemala, and it's like that for a lot of Latin America.
I suppose a lot of it depends on the motives of the people coming down into Guatemala as well, because there's a certain group that are, as you say, coming down under the flag of impact investing, but their motives are still kind of in the traditional extractive mentality, and they're looking to make as much money as they can in the short term. So that is the big challenge, something that it was designed, I suppose, to help ecosystems flourish in places like Guatemala, has been to a certain extent, I think, compromised. I think the revolutionary impact of impact investing has been watered down. That's just my own belief on it. But it is interesting over the last, I suppose, 6 to 12 months, I've seen a lot more posts on LinkedIn about impact investing. I've seen a lot more venture capital firms start up, and all of a sudden they're impact investment firms. I saw one on LinkedIn recently where it said, is impact investing hype or substance? And it's a new impact investment firm that's been set up in Ireland. And the people on the picture and the speakers are the ex-Prime Minister of Ireland, who's probably on a pension of about 150 grand a year, and the Age from U2, the band, and then someone high up in Bank of America and someone high up in the Financial Times. Now, that's fine. I like people talking on the subject, but what I would say is that, and I said this on the post, is that we need to be hearing more from the people on the ground in Guatemala and other regions that actually need the capital, because it's their stories that matter. So I think, would you say that that's the biggest challenge, in that you see there's a big capital need, but a lot of the time the infrastructure in your country, it's the same people doing the same thing, rather than saying, okay, well, these young people here have a really good idea, let's just get the capital to them. I remember you telling me, Juan Carlos, that just to get access to the money, that you had to have a big fund just to get started. So it was a chicken and the egg scenario to actually put ideas to work, and that kind of bureaucracy is what kind of clogs up the system.
Yeah, I mean, it's at different scales of how complicated it can be. With this COVID building back better idea, suddenly there's capital available, but existing institutions to actually flow to local projects that are profitable, that can make money, that have interesting return rates in short time periods, it's not set up for it. So basically, you don't really have any flexibility on like where you go to. It's always the existing institutions receiving the capital internationally or nationally, and then it's stuck in the same kind of corruption and bureaucracy that you always have. And that's kind of the main issue. It's not just the capital, it's the institutional setup and who talks to who and who's controlling the narrative. Really what you said is very, very accurate, because even when there are successful projects that are impactful, that the impact flow through an institution, the people who actually take credit for it are the institution or the NGO, who have the budget for the communications and the outreach. And then you don't get any scale, because you just have like this one project which they take pictures of 20 times, and then you hear about the same project over and over, and it's repeated over and over, and everyone knows what these projects are. but then are you really reaching scale with that? And it's just the institutional setup which makes it very difficult. So yeah. It's something that goes beyond just the capital structure. It's also the systemic structure of who receives the money.
I think you kind of nailed it there, Juan, because one of the biggest things is with all of this is that everyone wants credit. So first of all, rather than doing something for the sake of doing it, they need to get their faces up on every magazine, left, right, and centre, and they need the publicity around it, rather than staying in the trenches and doing the work that actually matters for the right reasons. And that's part of the frustration of being involved in the area of responsible investment and sustainability. There's a lot of talk. And in terms of Guatemala itself, people probably think of Guatemala, I suppose one of the first things that comes to mind is probably the caravans going up to the United States and immigrants escaping Guatemala because they're living in poverty and they've no other option. Is that still one of the biggest challenges that Guatemala faces?
So I would say that Guatemala is a very rich country. It has many natural resources, and we have a lot going for us. The thing that really does not help our country is the way it's designed to benefit the few, and it leaves a lot of the majority of the population feeling that they don't really have much of a chance, because the reality is much of Guatemalans are very hardworking people. They're very entrepreneurial and they're very resourceful. But there's been several dynamics that have made things change. For example, climate change has been a big issue that has forced a lot of migration up north. Not because people want to leave. Most of the people in Guatemala don't want to leave. It's because they're forced to leave. And a lot of their crops, Guatemala is really based on agriculture. Just a lot of the crops that are normally grown just are not growing anymore. There's droughts, there's floods, a lot of natural disasters. So I would call it, going back to what my brother was saying, to being a systemic issue to begin with.
Yeah, and I think on that point, we're always talking about a sustainable economy, but we have to have a sustainable global economy. And so we have to look at the planetary challenges we face. And looking at Guatemala is interesting for people that want to learn more about it. The history with the Arbenz government, when you tried to have a democratically led government, the influence of the US, all of those things that have contributed to where Guatemala is today. But I think one of the things that is often missed from a global perspective is that the challenges that Guatemala faces poses other challenges for other nations like the United States with the immigrant crisis. But we're not tackling it at source. So that's what I see as the big problem with what's going on in the world. What do you think, Juan Carlos?
Yeah, I mean, there's also this interesting dynamic from an economics perspective, which is that, it's actually beneficial for a lot of high-level government officials and large companies for people to leave Guatemala and send remittances back, because the increasing amount of remittances to Guatemala means consumption increases here while you don't actually have to provide any opportunities. So that, the amount of remittances last year, I think, hit around $10 billion. And that really does maintain a lot of these populations where you have flows into regions which otherwise wouldn't be able to survive, because they send dollars in, and the amount that they can get from that is quite large where they are. So it's also this strange dynamic, because there's really no incentive for the government to improve, because they're still maintained. Our economy is maintained by remittances right now. So it has to be tackled differently, and as you say, it has to be done at the source. And with climate change, it becomes more difficult when you have a globalized market. Coffee prices plummet, and then smallholder farmers that were depending on that price, it just takes one bad yield, and then they have to sell their land and leave. So it becomes a very complex systemic issue at that point, which has a lot of implications, and it really does depend on the market as well.
Yeah. And from a social perspective, though, when people have to leave their country, that has a big knock-on effect in terms of communities as well. And, there's a lot of stories of dads having to leave their families to try and make a living in the United States to, as you say, send money back. And the big challenge is when they go to these countries, that because they're not legal, they can't go back and visit their family. So I remember talking to someone at a soccer game, and an old guy, he was probably in his late 50s, and he came over chatting to me. He thought I was from the United States, which I very quickly cleared up. No, I'm Irish. And he told me the story of working in the United States, and he had good things to say about the United States, worked hard. And then one evening, the immigration security came in to where he was staying to find somebody else, but they checked his papers as well. And so he was sent back after working there 10, 12 years, putting in a hard shift, sending money back to his family. And when he came back, he didn't really have anything. His wife had moved in with, the house that he had built, she was living with somebody else. And, his life was kind of turned upside down. So there's a lot of personal stories that happen, I think, with the immigration stuff that we don't always think of. But in terms of, the changes that you guys would like to see, is there any kind of one or two things that you would say, well, if we could just do this, we might move forward a little bit better?
Well, definitely more than a few, but I think the main thing is governance. I think that's something that you, Vincent, are particularly focusing on. But it expands more to an integrated way where you want actual representation and bottom-up approaches being developed. So I think, actually creating the spaces for people to be able to decide on their own natural resources and like the regions they're living in is essential to actually get sustainable development, because it's not enough if you're conserving, 10, 15, 20% of the territory if the rest is converted into extractive industries, and it doesn't, like, you no longer have enough ecosystemic services to survive on. And that's the big challenge, where you want to decentralize something that's incredibly centralized in terms of capital, and in terms of influence and power, and that's the main challenge. But it's the only way that I think we can actually get to sustainable outcomes and impacts, because it's something that is long term. By definition, an impact does take quite a bit of time to get to, and to get to that, you need people's buy-in. You need people to be committed. You need people to think about things beyond just an 18-month period, beyond 2 years. They need to be committed to being place-based, and that's, I think, the main like steps we need to like be taking towards. And there are examples, and hopefully we can expand on those. But that would be my 2 cents.
Juan Fernando, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, so I think it really goes back to understanding the value that's seen externally in Guatemala, which is basically natural resources, right? So that's why there's interest in investing in Guatemala. There's a lot of resources that can be extracted. So it's really important for Guatemalans and for other people to understand the actual value and the unique resources that Guatemala has, because as you said in the beginning, we have volcanoes, we have rainforests, we have mountains, we have beaches, we have it all. So for us to be able to understand this is unique, this is not in every single country, and we need to protect this. And if we don't do this, nobody else will do it for us. And you see in other countries that are already devastated, and they don't have much left in terms of their natural richness. If we lose that, then going forward, we don't have much attraction for future investment. So I think a big thing that we need to talk about is sustainable development and what that means. And for everyday people in Guatemala, it's not something they think about, but it really is one of our biggest attractions.
I think that's an important point, because it's about first of all, it's a change of mindset. And as you said, in terms of getting people to think long term, which is very difficult in an attention economy where everybody's focused on 30-second clips. They don't want to put in the investment to understand what's actually going on. And the second point is valuing what you already have. So I think a lot of people tend to look externally to see what success looks like, or how are we going to develop our economy like other countries. And the US is often used as an example, but Guatemala, as you say, is very rich in natural resources. The problem is the extraction of the materials causes an impact, and two, the materials that you're impacting, you're only getting a tiny percentage of the value of it, because it's going further up the supply chain and people are using those materials. So it's understanding the value of that. And when you were talking, an interesting example came to mind where I remember in Quetzaltenango, Shela, where we lived. Do you remember the McDonald's on the corner? And it always blew my mind. One of the things that blew my mind there was that you had amazing avocados, like really good vegetables, like really good. Like in Ireland, when you pick up an avocado, it's typically as hard as a rock and you have to wait about a week for it to actually soften. And it's not very good when it comes out. But in Guatemala, they're top quality, right? And it just always blew my mind that you could get the avocados for the equivalent of, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 cents or whatever it is in euro terms, but really cheap. And then you'd have people going into McDonald's, which was still relatively expensive in Quetzaltenango. And I remember going in one night and saying to them, lads, why are you eating in McDonald's? You've got the best of agriculture here. And it became this perception that if we can eat in McDonald's, we're doing well. And that's the challenge, isn't it?
It's a huge problem because, and I think it's something we've been fed into just because of our proximity to the United States, right? Like everything that's American is better, everything that's imported is better. And I think for me personally, it took living in other countries to realize what I have in my own home country, which I think most people don't have that privilege or to be able to do that. But just understanding that, like, I become really focused on local products, local companies, local services, because you realize just the collateral effect of investing in your own economy.
That's so true. And can you kind of talk a little bit about what you guys are doing now? I know, Juan Carlos, you're working in landscape finance. You're doing something interesting as well. Juan Fernando, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah, I can jump in. I actually work at a place called Eco Agriculture Partners. We work on really developing integrated approaches at a landscape level. So just for a bit of background, we work under an idea called integrated landscape management, which is really like this holistic long-term approach to territorial development, ensuring there's actual agreement amongst multi-stakeholders around different regions, different places, and it can be defined in many different ways. It's not just land; it can be seascapes. And we're developing an initiative called 1,000 Landscapes for 1 billion people. We work with a bunch of NGOs, Conservation International, WWF, Rainforest Alliance, etc., where like I said, there's this issue of lack of coordination and lack of governance in different places. So what we've realized is there's multiple NGOs working in the same place, not coordinating or talking to each other, and kind of competing over limited resources that are already there to, in theory, make things more sustainable. So the idea with this is to really coordinate efforts and really lower the costs of working in different places to conserve resources and also give people sustainable livelihoods. So my main focus is around landscape finance. We're working on this idea of developing integrated portfolios at a landscape level so that you could actually incentivize and lower risks among an existing region or a landscape. And the idea is that if people are sharing risk and people are also sharing the benefits, that's how you could reach sustainable development. So it's been very, very interesting. We're also supporting a couple of landscape initiatives in Guatemala, which I'm incredibly happy about. But it's more the systemic view of things. We work, at this like large international level for the moment, and it's very important, at least for me, where like you can actually connect it to tangible things on the ground. And for me, that's Guatemala. It's understanding the landscapes here and like seeing it through that lens of what does that mean. So yeah, we're basically in development of that, and these systemic questions are also very, very complicated. So it's great to always have conversations with people like you, Vincent, that are working on different aspects of financial problems and systemic issues that we all have to find a way to deal with if we're gonna move forward in a positive way.
Yeah, and I think landscape finance is probably something people will hear a lot more about. When I first heard it, I thought you were just talking about doing up people's back gardens, that type of landscaping. But it's a much more holistic approach to kind of developing sustainable communities and protecting the ecosystem within particular regions. And that's a huge issue because of the biodiversity loss. So it's a really interesting area to be in. And Juan Fernando, since you moved on from Alternate Impact in Quetzaltenango, what have you been doing to change the world?
Yeah, so I actually founded a company called Regenera. And what we do is we're a consulting company that works with NGOs, companies, private landowners to transition from conventional agriculture to regenerative agriculture, mainly agroforestry, which is the combination of agriculture with trees. And we were really inspired through the work of Ernest Gotch, who's a farmer based in Brazil, and his type of agriculture, which he has really not perfected, but he's really laid a groundwork for. So basically, what we're trying to do is work on a local level with communities, with companies to create sustainable production. And if my brother's working more on a systemic level, I'm really working on the ground with different communities, going to different part of the countries to get to know what these small producers are like, what are their challenges, what are their opportunities, what's their perspective on life. And yeah, we started about 2 years ago. It's been quite a ride. COVID has definitely shifted things, and yeah, we're really excited because we really feel like Guatemala and a lot of Latin America is a really attractive place to do this type of agriculture. We have a lot of competitive advantages due to the climate, due to the weather, due to the temperature in itself. So yeah, we're really excited. It's come with a lot of challenges, trying to find funding, trying to make people understand, because it's not just selling our services, it's also educating potential clients about what are the opportunities for them that they don't see that exists. And I feel like climate change has been a big momentum or a big push that's helped a lot of people understand that things are changing. And if we don't change the way we grow our food and the way we produce, our relationship to the land, to the water, to biodiversity, then we'll be going broke in a couple of years. So that's kind of our angle of how we're trying to enter the market.
So what you're saying is you're effectively trying to empower local farmers, because one of the big issues is how they use the land. And then also there's, over the last number of decades, there's been a big push towards large scale farming, which really impacts the land. And you're trying to produce something that's a bit more sustainable and efficient, and trying to empower local farmers that maybe have small farms to understand how they can make the most out of their land and cultivate it, and then to bring their produce to market. Is that effectively what you're trying to do?
Yeah, we're basically trying to show them that a lot of the ancestral ways that their ancestors used to farm is actually the most efficient and that has the most value. So we're trying to connect them to organic sellers or buyers. And we're really trying to see how to create these incentives from the community perspective, and also for companies that buy from small farmers. So trying to find those links and those gaps. And we also realize we can't do this alone. So we also have an organization called Red Agroforestal, which is a convener of regenerative agriculture in the region. So we've done a lot of events, over 250 people, in a big event we did in 2018, and just basically like create interests, create alliances, see who's doing what. Because what we've realized is a lot of people that are doing really interesting things, they don't communicate what they're doing and they're not sharing their knowledge. And this is something that, instead of looking at all these different organizations as competition, we see them as allies, because if we want to grow this there, then we really need to know who's doing what and work together.
Yeah, that's exactly it, because you need that collaboration to really move things forward on a grand scale. And I know from my own work that you have to keep talking to people, and over time then you tend to gravitate towards the people and organizations that are actually serious. So you have to kind of weed out the people that are just in it for the short term to get as much as they can out of it for themselves, and that you eventually start working with people that really care about this stuff. Yes, they're in a commercial business, but at the end of the day, they care about it and they're doing it for the right reasons. They're authentic, they're genuine. they're the types of people that can motivate you to do more as well, because you know yourself, a lot of this stuff is frustrating because you get to see how big our challenges actually are. And when you go down those rabbit holes, it can kind of be fairly difficult. You kind of go, oh, we're in a difficult position here, you know. So I think that is important in terms of collaboration. And then in terms of like, what's the plans over the next couple of years? Is it just continue to grow your respective organizations and to continue to make more of an impact?
I think for me, yes. I think it's it's important to do as much as we can today to learn and set the basis of what's coming next. Every initiative, every place like you're in is uncertain. You can't be sure of what's going to be coming in the future. But we have to do whatever we can, and it doesn't at least for me rely on one organization. It just depends on where we can have the most positive impact, for people in nature, which is really what we need to be focusing on. And moving forward, I mean, I moved organizations quite a lot, and it's just very dependent on where I think I can be the most helpful. And towards the future, with so many things changing, it's just going to depend on what's needed and what I think that I can actually bring to the table.
Yeah, for me, I'm focused on Regenera, and that's where my focus is right now. I think it has a lot of potential. There's a lot of challenges that are coming for us, but I think ever since I found this type of agriculture in Brazil, and I saw just how many solutions it can change, it can really create a big impact. I fell in love with it, and we'll see where it takes us.
Well, I wish you the best of luck on the projects, because I know, having worked in companies and worked for myself, I think the nice thing about doing something yourself is that you have complete control, and you control the direction things take. So yes, there's ups and downs, but at least you wake up in the morning with a sense of purpose in terms of what you're doing, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, I feel like for me, like I went through existential crises when I was living in Brazil, just figuring out what I want to do with my life. And I feel like it's not a linear journey, right? Like life has its ups and downs, but just if you're confident what you're doing and you feel that passion, that energy, it goes a long way. And at the end of the day, it brings you happiness.
No, you're dead right, Juan. Yeah, I mean, you should read, I don't know if you've read it, but Jean-Paul Sartre, his defense of existentialism. And on that point, I mean, he's just basically saying that essence comes after existence. So basically, we define our sense of purpose, we give our life meaning, and what you're saying makes perfect sense. We'll have to probably have another podcast on existentialism and defining your sense of purpose, but that's what it comes down to. That's what life, we've a short time on this planet. We can either decide to go down that linear path and do the same thing every day in, day out, or we can kind of pursue new challenges, and that's what it's about. And if it's not working, you move on to the next thing, and you can keep doing that. There's no sense of failure, even if your project or my stuff or whatever. I always have gone into it saying, well, at the very least, I'm going to learn a lot. And by doing that, you build up confidence and you build up understanding that you could take anywhere in the world. So I think we're probably similar in that type of mindset.
Yeah, I feel like just meeting you, Vincent, and Sheila, for the time we've crossed our path, like the type of connections you create, and the type of relationships. So like at the end of the day, you're leaving this place with nothing, right? But along the way, you really create these connections and these relationships, and be it professional, be it personal, be it whatever it is, like it's definitely worth it. And yeah, it's quite a ride.
It is. And look, even if I went back probably 5 years ago and I thought I would be in Guatemala living in the hills of Shela, and some of the stories that I accumulated over those days, and that I've learned Spanish now as well, I probably couldn't have envisaged that, but that's the exciting thing about life. You can write your own chapters. And I have to say, it's great to have you guys on the podcast, because it's not only interesting to hear from you, but also get to kind of go down memory lane to a certain extent, because it seems like it wasn't that long ago, but it was 2017. So a lot has passed since then, so it is really good to be chatting with you.
I definitely remember just like our time there, like it was intense and there was a lot of things happening. And yeah, we had a lot of philosophical chats about many things. And like, I think everyone was in a period of their lives where like a lot of things were changing and nothing was stable. And there were a lot of opportunities. And I think like just feeding off of that, I think it made us go like in our own paths. And yeah, it's really great to reconnect.
Yeah, and to meet Juan Carlos as well. It's been good having our conversations as well. An interesting character.
Yeah. No, it's been great. It's fantastic to have these kinds of discussions. All over the world, we live in such a connected, globalized place now. Everything affects us at a certain degree now, and it's important that we develop kind of, I think, these communities. This podcast, I think, is a great example of how investment and capital are the same no matter where you are. It just contextually changes the risk and reward ratios, but it's important to really realize how these things are different moving forward. And it's really great to see people doing the philosophically connected work, and really connecting to what they want to be doing moving forward and actually executing it, because like you said, there's so much talk going on, and then actually seeing impact and tangible results is it's what, at least for me, like fulfills me on a day-to-day basis. So it's it's been great chatting.
Well, with that, I suppose we better call an end to this podcast, but I hope that I'll have you on again soon, and I'm sure in the meantime we'll be chatting anyway.
Thank you so much for having me and my brother Vincent. And I'm sure one day we'll be able to go visit you in the beaches of Mexico.
Yeah, you're always welcome wherever I am, whether it's Mexico, Ireland, or any other part of the world. You'll always be welcome. We'll have a couple of shelas on the beach, hopefully at some stage. Cheers, lads. Cheers for taking the time to listen to the ESG Factor podcast. If you're interested in a more sustainable future, then check out the ESGfactor.com for details on our Patreon community and how you can support the making of more content like this. I'm Vincent, and I'll catch you later.